Hello，你好，Welcome back，欢迎回来to Wisdom Wednesday with Johnny Tiger on December 2nd, 2020. Last week we talked about one of the five common pagan gods in Chinese history, or Chinese mythologies rather, the fox being the head of the five gods. And this week we are going to continue this series, and I'm going to tell you of a second common pagan god or demigod that Chinese people, even to this day, especially for people who live in the northern China, northeastern China, really believe in. And there are just tons of superstitions and legends and stories surrounding this animal that it's quite incredible for something this small can generate such a huge sensation for thousands of years for millions and millions of people. The animal I'm talking about today, the second animal on the five god list, is the weasel. Yeah, I know. A lot of people are like, weasel? How can that thing be a god? That's crazy. Well, apparently, it is not just any weasel. When Chinese people talk about weasels, that specifically, especially in godhood, in mythology, the weasel they're referring to is the Siberian weasel. Now, how is the Siberian weasel differ from your everyday normal North American weasels that we see in our backyard? I don't know. I mean, I can probably go on Wikipedia and or YouTube and find some answers, but as of this video, I have no idea what's the difference between a Siberian weasel and a regular weasel. Uh, I'm imagining that maybe being from Siberia, they're a lot bigger. Maybe. I don't know. They're more badass. Uh, Trained like Siberian Special Forces Russian soldiers? I don't know. Uh, in Mandarin, weasel or Siberian weasel, that's going to be a kind of a mouthful to say Siberian weasel every time. I'm going to say weasel from the rest of this video, but just know that it's not any common weasel. It has to be a Siberian weasel. So, the name for this animal in Mandarin is Huang Shu Lang. Direct translation: yellow rodent wolf, yellow mouse wolf, yellow rat wolf, or yellow rodent wolf. So why did the Chinese people first start worshipping this little animal that is really uh, more often than not a pest than anything else? Well, in the old days, especially in northern eastern China, a lot of people rely on their crop for their livelihood. A lot of them grow corn, wheat, and they raise chickens and sheep and goat. And for most of these ranchers, farmers, uh, the biggest troubling thing were foxes, which we covered last week, and the yellow rat wolf, the Siberian weasel or weasel. However, even back then, thousands of years ago, farmers realized they couldn't just go ahead and exterminate these weasels because while the weasels would kill the occasional chicken and steal eggs and do damage to the property, they were very useful for keeping down the rat and mice population. So if you were to go out of your way to exterminate them, you would end up being uh, infested with rats and mice. And what comes on the heel of rats and mice is plague. So you couldn't just get rid of the weasel, you have to keep them around. So people started finding all kinds of ways to appease the weasel so they wouldn't cause so much problem for the farm. People would leave food items out for the weasels. People would leave little tributes, special feeding stations, later being converted into chapels and monasteries for the weasel god, believing that if you keep the weasel god happy, then the weasel will help you get rid of mice and rodents while leaving your livestock alone. And as I said, even to this day, there are a lot of farming communities in northeastern China that if you go there and stay with a Chinese family, and after dinner, before bedtime, they'll sit down and they'll tell you stories of the weasel god, stories of weasels that try to obtain godhood. Speaking of obtaining godhood, I mentioned last week that even though there is a clear, pretty precise map for every creature or an inanimate object to reach that crossroad where they can either become a demigod or a demon, the experience and the requirement can be quite different. Like last week, we talked about the fox had to get up to growing 9 tails. Now, the requirement for weasels is really crazy and really rather funny. For a weasel to obtain immortality or to obtain demigod status, for the weasel to be able to cross that final threshold, to be able to transform into human shape, human form, to speak human tongue, to do human things. This weasel had to spend thousands of years uh, imitating, copying, observing human beings until this weasel can imitate human good enough for a real human to say to it that it looked like a human. It literally needs a human's affirmation for it to reach godhood or demigodhood, if that's even a word. This is why a lot of the weasels that are on the way to achieve this status, they'll go out of their way to learn how to walk on their back leg. Uh, and this part is kind of creepy because apparently these weasels, when you see them in the wilderness, a lot of times they will stand up on their back leg and walk like human beings. And the older Chinese people will tell you that that is like that right there is a weasel that is almost to immortality. You don't want to mess with it because uh, and even though a weasel for the most part is a good deity, it is a trickster. It is kind of similar to Loki from the Norse mythology. Uh, the weasel, while will not go out of his way to do evil things, if you annoy the weasel god will find all kinds of ways to mess with you until you either apologize or you suffer some horrendous way to die. So the weasel god is not a god or not a deity that people want to trifle with because of its fondness for playing tricks on people. There was an old story from the classic Chinese ghost collection from 500 years ago that speak of this Chinese temple that offended a weasel, and it got plagued by this walking skull. Like people started seeing this in the middle of the night. People would see this skull, like human skull, just started walking around the temple. Like, and that's kind of creepy when you think about it. Like you come out of the house and you see a skull just wandering all over the place on its own, like not even attached to your body, not a zombie or skeleton, just a skull, just on the floor, just moving around. That's really scary. Uh, until one day, a famous Chinese general and his troop were staying at the monastery. And in the middle of the night, the general couldn't sleep, and he decided to go out and walk around the property. And he got spooked, and he saw this skull just wandering around. Well, this is the difference between an accomplished military general and a normal civilian. Normal civilian, when they get scared, they run away. Accomplished military general, when he gets scared, he gets mad. He got angry and scared, and he went over and swung his foot and kicked this skull so hard that the skull flew over and rolled over down the hill, and the general went down the hill after this skull, picked the skull up, and saw a little pair of weasel legs sticking out from underneath the skull. So all this time, people thought they were being haunted by some moving human skull. It's this weasel god, it's this immortal weasel that been playing tricks on them. That the weasel crawled into an empty human skull that it dug out of a grave and been walking around scaring people with that. That's a kind of weird thing that the weasel was said to be able to get up to if you offend them. Now, of course, the problem for weasel is how are they supposed to get human affirmation for them to finally accomplish their goal to become demigod? Well, it is really difficult, and there is a funny story that's been passed on for many, many generations that kind of make a joke of that. The story goes that there was this old guy by the name of Wayne. Now, Wayne owned a watermelon patch because Wayne was always scared other people were going to come up and steal his watermelon when he wasn't paying attention, when he wasn't at the patch. He set up a tent by the watermelon patch so he could sleep there at night. So children from neighboring villages wouldn't sneak in and steal his watermelon. But despite of all his effort, occasionally he still get watermelon that just go missing out of empty air, out of thin air. And Wayne got really angry. Then he started asking around and asked people, "Are you guys stealing my watermelon?" And all the villagers said, "No, no, you should be thankful. Maybe it's a uh, weasel god. Maybe there's a weasel that live nearby. Maybe the weasels are taking your watermelon. That's good. If the weasel like your watermelon, that means the weasel will leave our chicken alone, and the weasel will go after mice and rats and keep the whole village safe from pests." Well, that's good for the villager, but Wayne was still kind of angry and annoyed about it. So the story goes that one night, in the middle of the night, Wayne woke up from a sound sleep in the tent by his watermelon patch. And he saw this short little form walking toward his tent. And it turned out to be an old weasel. And the weasel had a piece of leaf on its head like a hat, and it had leaves covering its body like it was wearing clothes. It was walking while holding on a twig like it was an old man holding a cane. So the weasel was like walking like a little old man. The weasel walked up to Wayne, and the weasel said in a kind of garbled human language, asked Wayne, "Hey, dude, do I look like an old man?" That's what the weasel said. "Hey, dude, do I look like an old man?" Well, you got to keep in mind, first, Wayne just got woken up, and Wayne just got uh, over having his watermelon stolen for the past year or so, so he's not very happy with Weasel. So without a second thought, Wayne said, "No, you look like a piece of shit." It was said that this was a weasel that just spent the last 2,000 years trying to reach immortality. All it needed was a yes from Wayne, and it could become a demigod. But just because Wayne said no, you look like a piece of shit, the weasel's entire journey was wasted. It's now stuck. This is the thing. If for a weasel to ask that question, you can't just like it's not like you ask one person, that person say no, and you can try again. No, it doesn't work that way. If you ask the question, you can only ask it once. If a person say yes, you go on become a demigod. Person say no, then you stay as a old weasel forever. It was said that shortly after, about a week or so after Wayne told the weasel that no, you don't look like an old man, you look like a piece of shit, Wayne's entire watermelon patch was dug up by a wild animal in the middle of the night. And then another week later, his tent was burned down. And then another week later, his house was infested with rats. This was the weasel's revenge for Wayne messing up his chance for becoming a demigod. So even today, a lot of northern Chinese will tell you, we rather offend the ghost, we rather offend regular God, we would even offend Buddha, but you don't want to offend a weasel god because a weasel god will find all kind of strange way to mess with you if you offend them. Next week we'll come back and we'll talk about the third animal god in this very interesting, very fun, and sometimes a little bit creepy and scary pagan religion. Thank you for checking out today's Wisdom Wednesday. Be back tomorrow for Toy Thursday. For now, have a good night and 再见。